Hello, it is February 5th, 2020, and this is an interview for the director of second edition. I am Charlie, and I'm here with Scott Neelix on the forums,
Hi, everyone.
who is one of our candidates. This is being recorded and may be released to the public. So before we get started, I do need to have a verbal consent from everyone on the call. It's just two of us, but I'll go first. I do consent to this being recorded. Scott, could you give me a verbal consent that you're okay with this being recorded?
I am okay with this call being recorded and posted later for consumption.
Awesome. So I have a dog going completely crazy right now. Deal with that for a second. All right. All right. So Scott, you are the final interview. I've had 4 candidates, and you're the last one to be interviewed, just because that's the way the timing worked. So what's going to happen next is all of the candidates who did consent will have their interviews posted, and there'll be about a week of public deliberation where they'll be able to watch your videos and ask you questions, and you'll be able to go in and answer them. The selection committee will also be watching, and at the end of that week, we'll start making decisions on who we're going to pick and what we're going to do. So once we're done here, the process begins the next phase. I anticipate it taking a couple weeks, and then we'll be making a decision. So just so you know where we are in the process and what's happening. So
Excellent.
all right. So let's get into the interview. I like to start with sort of the elephant in the room question, and the elephant in the room question I have for you is you sort of took in a couple years break from the game, and only relatively recently have come back, and now you're aiming to be the top man in the 2E game. Can you tell me a little bit about why you took that break and why you came back, and now why you feel like you're interested in jumping into the top job?
Sure. So the main reason that I took a break was work heated up. I got promoted, and my job at the newspaper that I work for, I became the editor-in-chief. And so it was going to take up a lot more of my time. So I didn't want to be the guy who was the ambassador and tournament director for our area when I knew that I couldn't give it the commitment that I needed to. But after that promotion, another promotion happened. And now I'm pretty much my own boss, and I work from home full time. So that gives me way more time to do hobby stuff. And I feel that I was once again able to make that a priority. And so I could commit more time to doing Star Trek card game activities. And that has worked out pretty well so far. I think technically my full-time break was only about 18 months, but it was pretty close to 2 years.
That's fair. I didn't go look at the dates. Yeah, I mean you've been sort of an institution in Trek for a long time, and I know people noticed when you left, and I wanted to
it was nothing to do with being dissatisfied with the committee or anything like that. It was just that blasted real world. You know how it goes.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Jonathan. Welcome into the call. This is Jonathan. He's Triumph on the boards. Jonathan, we're talking with Scott.
Hi, Jonathan.
Real quick, Jonathan, can I get your verbal consent to participate in this call that is being recorded?
Yes.
Thank you. So I had just asked Scott about his break from the game, about an 18-month to 24-month break. And it was literally just the first question, so you haven't missed much.
Cool.
So yeah, Jonathan, jump in if you have a follow-up to anything, or you have a question that segues off something we're talking about. Please jump in.
And so anyway, Charlie, continuing on, I think the second part of your question was, why do I want to be director of 2E now? And you kind of hit the nail on the head there a few seconds ago when you said that, prior to having to take that break, I was an institution in Star Trek cards. And I had been involved in the game since day one of first edition. So, first edition, of course, leading on into second edition. Um, and what really brought it to the forefront for me was I had a friend in elementary school, all through high school and college. His name was Kevin. He and I played the original game together, along with lots of other kinds of games, of course, and then segued on into second edition. And It was a bit of a shock to me. Last month, I found out that unfortunately my friend had taken his own life. And When I looked back at our relationship, I realized that the games in general, but this card game in particular, had been a really big part of our time together. And I wondered to myself, when you experience a situation like that, uh, everyone that knew the person involved always asks themselves, is there something I could have done differently? And I wondered, if I had spent more time reaching out, would that have impacted his decision? And of course, you can never really know for sure, but it made me reevaluate the way that I was committed to playing with my current play groups, and just spending time with friends. And I realized that I needed to, really double down on reaching out to people, and that the Star Trek card game was a really big part of a lot of my friendships and just relationships in general over the decades now. And so then I decided to take a step back to a broader view. And I thought, if it's that important to me and my friends, it's so important that back in the day I was a D agent and been a tournament director, playtester, ambassador, etc. How many other people out there in the world is this still a huge and important part of their relationships? And the answer is obviously several, many, many people. And I thought, over the years, I've gotten a lot from the game, and I've tried to give back with these various volunteer positions, but I've never tried to do anything really impactful. Like you said earlier in the call, a much higher level of volunteering. And I'm like, if there's ever a time that I'm going to go for it and try to make that commitment, this is the moment. Because, my friend's passing really impacted me, as you can probably tell. And I thought, if it's that important to me, there's plenty of other people out there that it's really important to for second edition, not only to be a game in their past, but to exist and continue to be a part of their lives and their relationships. And if I can help that continue by becoming the second edition director, then that's what I should try to do. And so that is the reason that now is the time that I'm asking to be considered for being a bigger part of the committee.
Thank you for that answer, and thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
So one other potential elephant in the room is that there's a excuse me, were you to get the position of director, you would have a member of your play group working right under you. That's Nathan Miracle, who is currently the design director for TUI. Do you? I mean, we all believe that we can work professionally, and I'm not particularly worried about that. But what I'm curious about is there's the potential for there to be some pushback or a negative response to that, where people might accuse. I'm not trying to say these accusations have merit, but some may accuse you of being a puppet for Nathan, or that this is, a shadow deal. Could you speak to that a little bit and sort of maybe reassure that that's not really the case?
No, it's not the case at all. He does a lot of great work with design, and we have been part of a playtest group for years. And in our playtest group, nobody has, the final say. Nobody's a puppet for anyone else. He and I have disagreed in the playtest group many times. I stick to my guns and present evidence to him of, this or that particular card design is bad, or this or that particular card interaction is going to be a negative play experience, what have you. And we work it, like you said, we work it out like professionals. But also, sometimes it's important that you have people who are friends working together on teams. Teamwork and camaraderie can lead to some very good product output, some very good work. And so I actually think that would be a bit of an asset. I can understand people would have concerns about there maybe being a conflict of interest here or there, but that's why, we have, processes like this. People give feedback. People have observations, and I would be very much open to a very open process. And I have no qualms whatsoever about telling Nathan what's what and calling him on the carpet if I need to.
Okay. So give me your quick assessment on where the 2E game and the 2E community are right now. And yeah, we'll start with that.
Yeah, so I feel like right now the community is doing okay. The game itself has had some interesting new design choices introduced over the past few years, and I think that it's good that we are continuing to grow the card pool. Obviously, that is one of the major components of the committee as an entity, is to keep making new cards. Um, I think that the community as a whole maybe has begun to shrink a bit, um, and not always necessarily because people are dissatisfied or upset with the product or the way things are being run. A lot of people are facing situations like I did. We're all getting older now, for the most part, and real life is creeping in. I think that for the way that the committee is working now, we are doing a pretty good job of keeping the game alive, introducing new cards and new topics, but we probably need to do a little better job of trying to retain and acquire new players.
So, speaking on that particular point, how it's not entirely within the responsibility of the director of second edition or even the director of first edition to recruit players for those games. It's a larger effort. But what would you see yourself doing as director of 2E to re-engage lapsed players or recruit new players?
I think a big part of re-engaging lapsed players, which I'll speak to that first, is making sure that the tournaments and the events and just overall activities are widely publicized enough that even lapsed players who don't frequent the Trek CC homepage every day or every week would find out about it, and make the activities and the tournaments to a lesser degree fun enough and casual enough that it would draw back lapsed players who feel like maybe they don't have the time to make it a lifestyle game like it once was. And as such, I would like to see maybe some more casual focused efforts about particular. I love the achievement system we've had for many years now. I would like to see maybe some more stuff like that done, to where people are rewarded even with virtual rewards, for things that they do at a weekly or monthly game night. Because not everybody's going to have time to come to Continentals or go to Gen Con or go to a Masters. But speaking to those higher level events like Masters and whatnot, I also want to make sure that those types of things are still promoted in such a way and prioritized in such a way that they're going to keep the interest of existing players as well as try and bring back lapsed players. And then as far as the second part of the question about bringing in new players, as director, I think the biggest thing would be to make sure that all the 2E operations run smoothly enough that people can expect us to hit deadlines and make releases when they have been promised, so that new players who come to the website see that not only is there a nice website and a great place to meet people, but stuff is happening. Things are going on. There's signs of life for quote unquote a dead card game.
Okay, thank you for that answer. That actually segues into a question I had, a comment that I particularly liked on your application, where you talk about in your current job, you have a lot of experience handling groups of people on various assignments and making sure those assignments get done on a tight deadline.
You got it.
and that's something that the organization has struggled with on and off for 10 years. So how do you take that skill set where you're a supervisor of a group of paid employees and translate it to a supervisor of a bunch of unpaid employees that don't have the resources that a business might have?
Sure. What you have to do is know your team. My employees at the Mecklenburg Times newspaper, which you can read more of at mechtimes.com, don't necessarily get paid more or less if they meet their deadlines. A reporter at a newspaper or a contributor at a website, because, we have both of those things in our network, they don't work on commission per se. So I can't use money as a carrot or a stick, other than the nuclear option of, if you don't meet this deadline, you're fired. And of course, that's not a thing in the continuing committee much either, because we don't want to be in the habit of showing people the door unnecessarily. So what you have to do is know your team and figure out ways to motivate them. And sometimes that can be as simple as figuring out which way individual volunteers like to be praised. Like if I were talking with you about some event and things weren't, coming together on this or that project, I would figure out a way that you, Charlie, like for me to compliment you so that you could understand that your contributions are valuable and important to the continuing committee. Same with any other volunteer that I'm working with. It's about finding the way to motivate people. And you do that by getting to know those people and understanding their individual perspectives on things. And this is true of any project, but I think in a Star Trek related project, understanding our infinite diversity ought to be a really, important step of the process.
Excellent answer. Again, Jonathan, if you want to jump in here at any time, feel free. And I'll definitely cede some floor time for you to ask your own questions. But
Sure.
Scott, go ahead. Yeah.
Just to clarify from previously, so would you say that the greatest problem facing second edition at this point is that whole recruitment retention issue? Or would you name something else?
No, I think you're probably right. I mean, we can make the greatest cards in the universe, but if there's no players around, if there are no players around to play with them, then, what are we doing? That goes back to that motivation, because, if you make great cards and then nobody uses them in decks, the people who made those cards, whatever project that happened to be, they're going to be a little upset. They're going to be a little sad about their efforts feeling wasted. And I think the whole committee might feel that way if we look at continuing declining numbers of players being active in the community. So yeah, I think retaining players, getting new players, and getting old players to come back is a big deal. And we have a real opportunity at this moment in time with regard to the resurrection of players, if you will, because Star Trek as a property is really popular again right now, especially with people who used to like Star Trek: The Next Generation because of Star Trek Picard. And so while we can't utilize any of the current incarnations, we can certainly play on that nostalgia for people who feel that way, that separation of missing those characters. Then we can come to those former players and say, hey, and don't you remember how cool it was to play Star Trek cards with your friends? Well, guess what? Picard's back, and we haven't gone anywhere. We'd love for you to come back and check out second edition Star Trek again.
Okay, thank you. I guess I'll go ahead and shoot off another question. What is an area, the different departments under the director of second edition, design, rules, and so forth? Are there any that you'd say your familiarity with how that department operates is a little weak and you're going to need to do some on-the-job learning in order to lead effectively there?
Oh, for sure. And it would be the second one you mentioned there, the rules. I'm aware there's a rules committee, although, often the membership of the rules committee is secret, and I think that's fine. And that's great. But as such, I don't have a whole lot of familiarity with how that process works. So that is one of the ones that I would need to do some on-the-job learning. Obviously, I understand the rules of the game pretty well, and I, am up to date on current rulings documents and so forth. But as far as, who makes these decisions, what kind of debates are involved, etc., that I don't really have much experience with.
Okay. Yeah, I don't have any more questions for right now.
Okay.
Cool.
Thank you for that.
Thanks.
So, sort of in a broad sense, what's your vision for TUI over the next year or so? I guess what do you want to be talking about during the 2021 period of review as like, these are things that I did, or these are problems that I fixed?
I want to be talking about having really good new cards released for the game that hopefully I can point to say, getting these projects done in a timely and quality manner meant that we had X percentage of re-engagement of players. And I'd also love to be talking about having these particular events happen in a way that promoted the game, means that we had X percentage increase of participation in overall tournaments. You know, from the localist Friday night Star Trek tournament to the biggest deal at World Championships, you know, and anywhere in between. I would just love to be able to say, we produced quality product. We did it on time. We had previews that panned out in a way that people expected and loved, and therefore we've had people come back that had left, and or we've had new people join in. That means our overall participation has gone up. Because to me, that's the biggest metric for the continuing committee to measure success. I mean, engagement and card design and all that stuff is integral to having the committee be lively. But having players involved in official play, in organized play, is to me the biggest metric for the committee. You know, there are website numbers and Facebook posts, engagements, and Twitter followers, and all those metrics of measuring an audience, as you can tell from my day job, super familiar to me. But in our universe, if you will, the biggest metric is who is playing the game. But I also consider the online play of the game that is supported by the committee and TK and the group over on Discord and those who do all the lackey related stuff. That's huge, a huge part of our community. And I'd like to see that continue to grow, because more and more people are engaging what used to be considered tabletop games in a digital realm.
Yeah, absolutely. Technology is a pretty wonderful thing.
Yeah, so. Yeah. It means that people like you and I can play, Charlie, even though we live on opposite sides of the nation.
Absolutely. So if you get brought on as the design director, there's work that's in progress right now. There are sets being designed 2 or 3 steps ahead of what's in the pipeline right now. If you get brought on and you take a look at all of that and you have some serious concerns about them and it in the direction that it's going versus where you want the game to go, how do you broach that subject in a way? I guess it's not, how do you go about changing the course in a way that isn't, discouraging all the people that have done that work before?
I think what you have to do, and I guess like hypothetically, if I was not cool with the particular theme or property set of a card product being designed, rather than say, oh man, we got so much original series stuff already made, let's totally not make any more TOS related stuff this year and just poo-poo all over what they've done. Instead, maybe talk about how we could take the themes of, say, an original series based set and apply them to a different series or a different property group, but without necessarily getting rid of all the game text or even skill sets of all of the personnel or the missions or dilemmas or whatever that had already been worked on. Decipher used to have a process where they'd just put stuff back in the file and maybe it'd get recycled later. I think a way to express to a design team, hey, you guys have good ideas, but I want this set to focus more on TNG, is something that you can do once you get used to those people's personalities and the way that you communicate with them. You want to be able to tell them, hey, let's make a slight course correction that may actually be a very large course change, but without let's necessarily hitting them like a ton of bricks. So you'd have to say something to them along the lines of, I really love this idea of, I don't know, interacting with the discard pile, but let's do it in this way instead of directly so. Um, and, there's also opportunities to be able to point to people's projects and say, yeah, this is a cool idea about interacting with the discard pile. But remember how powerful the Greasy Ducat guy was when he interacted with the discard pile? Maybe we need to pull the reins back on that a little bit. Otherwise, we're going to end up having to fix it, a year from now. And we don't want to make more problems for ourselves in the future. So you can take ideas that people have for cards and recycle them in such a way that it may be with a different theme. Like, I've been talking a lot about Picard and Next Generation and nostalgia right now. Maybe I'd tell somebody, hey, these are really cool personnel abilities, but let's put them on some TNG guys because that's what people are really interested in right now, or whatever.
Yeah, that's fair enough. So, not sure how you've read the article recently or you're up on current events, but the current plan for design in over the next year is what they're calling Interaction 2020.
Mm-hmm.
And Nathan put up an article about that. So one of the questions that's been asked is, what is your definition of interaction in terms of 2E gameplay?
So for me, a game is interactive when both players have things that they can do, especially during their own turn, but sometimes even during their opponent's turn. I think the worst type of Star Trek game, card game, 1E or 2E, is when one player sits and watches. They become the spectator. They have nothing to do during the match. For me, I like to see abilities on personnel that give you new orders to do, that trigger off of other things happening in the game, like attempting missions or arriving at a new location. But I also like to see interrupts that do just that. I like to see interrupts that interrupt or stop the game around them while they do their thing. I don't mind the occasional interrupt with an order text on it. That's okay. But to me, an interrupt should be quote unquote faster than that. It should be moving along at a speed that really impacts the game with a sense of immediacy. And I think interaction means not just playing dilemmas when it's not your turn, but even using things like infiltrators or using cards in your hand when it's not your turn. And I think interaction also means being able to do stuff with your cards in play, even when it's not your turn. Whatever form that may take. I like it when there is a lot of player agency, is what I like to call it. You make a lot of runtime decisions. Years ago, we had discussions on the message boards about a pilot of a deck versus the designer of a deck. And that some people were good at designing decks and some people really good at piloting decks. To me, game interaction plays to the wheelhouse of those pilots. So you can have somebody like me who I feel that I'm a good pilot, but not as good of a deck designer. And like, I'll get to a tournament at Dragon Con and I'll be like, oh no, I forgot my cards in the hotel room. And Nathan will be like, well, here, you can play this Cardassian deck that I made last night. Here's how it works, blah, 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 blah. And I'll take it and just run the table and I'll do great. And at the end of the tournament, he'll be like, I am 0-7 with that deck. How did you do this? And that's because I'm more of a deck pilot than a deck designer. And in my opinion, the pilot crew, if you will, love that idea of more interaction. And that is player agency, runtime decisions. You're sitting at the game table and you need to make a call right then in response to your opponent's action or to follow up your own action to impact the game state. Not so much that the decks are so finely tuned that when we sit down across from each other, somebody can walk by who is a top level player and go, oh, well, Scott's going to lose that game because he's playing deck X and it always loses to deck Y. I don't want a meta where something always loses or something always wins to this or that deck. I mean, it's important to do a little bit of rock, paper, scissors, but the interaction is what keeps the game from becoming stale or a foregone conclusion when you sit down.
Thank you. So I want to talk a little bit about the 2E community. We've talked a good bit about the 2E game. So tell me a little bit about the first 3 or 6 months of a Scott Baughman administration and how you communicate with the community and how you present your vision of the game to the community.
So I'd definitely be writing a lot of articles that go on the website to talk about what I had planned, what I want to do, and then solicit feedback from people. And I would solicit that feedback and promote those articles and ideas, both on the message boards, of course, but also reaching out to people on social media. Because, like I said, unfortunately, not all the players that we're trying to entice back spend a lot of time on the committee's website. So I'd be reaching out to Facebook groups, Twitter, maybe some Instagram, because we can show off some of that really hard work that the design team does, and especially those borderless cards. Oh man, that stuff's gorgeous. Anyway, but we'd take those types of assets and we'd leverage them to draw eyeballs. We would leverage them to get people who like Star Trek but haven't necessarily paid attention to us for a while or never heard of us, to come and take a look. And so I would want to use my abilities as a writer to explain to people in plain English what I have planned, what I want to do, and when I want to accomplish it, and then promote it in all those various places. And as far as what it would look like, I think I would be focusing on making the game accessible to people, whether that be making quote unquote beginner friendly cards or making sure that the cards we're creating aren't too complicated, or promoting a series of events or ideas of gatherings that are almost like a tutorial or a rebirth, if you will, to show people, yes, this is the game you remember, but especially if you used to play 1E and you stopped, at the turn of the millennium, this is the game that you remember with a bunch of the problems fixed. And I say that with no ill malice toward 1E. As you know, I'm a former national champion for first edition, so I have nothing against the first edition of the game. That's how I met so many of my friends that I talked about earlier in the call. But obviously, even Decipher themselves understood there were some things that needed to be changed. That's the whole point of second edition. And that's why second edition is my favorite Star Trek game. I always have a soft spot in my heart for Star Trek 1E, because without it, we wouldn't have this game. But to me, second edition is a more straightforward and easier to play game that has more of that interaction we discussed earlier. And I would emphasize those things when I introduce people to what a Scott Baughman administration for 2E would look like. That is, emphasize the strong points of second edition, its interaction, its replayability, and its ability to avoid being a foregone conclusion when you sit down to play your match. So yeah, I think those would be my main focuses, is to keep the game from getting too complicated, and maybe even promote some ideas about, weekly or monthly gatherings in your local play groups where you're trying to rebirth the game.
So how would you tell me a little bit about, let's say, you do all that and you build all these articles and you start putting it out and it's not being well received for whatever reason, and there's pushback against this plan or this element of this plan. How do you respond to those criticisms and adapt if you need to? Can you talk us through that a little bit?
Sure. Obviously, in my day job, I receive letters to the editor and email comments and blah, blah, blah. So I'm used to people telling me that I'm full of it or a moron or et cetera. I don't expect that everybody on the committee, of course, would react that way. But even if they did, I am not above making changes. So if people come to me and say, hey, Scott, this whole idea about focusing on next generation is a terrible idea. It's a terrible, subfaction. I hate it. And I'd be like, well, I understand that. And I would then try to explain to people that it's not the kind of thing where we were going to completely ignore all of the other factions in the game. And really just take whatever their complaints are and monitor and adjust to that feedback. If that means that people don't want as much emphasis put on casual players, well, we would have to look at whether or not it was worth the investment of our time and resources. If people really feel like the key to getting people to come back to the game or to retain players is to focus on high level cutthroat competition, then I think we as a committee are nimble enough to be able to pivot and change direction if we had to. And I am not the kind of leader that would be incredibly entrenched in my own ideas such that I would never accept any feedback or, I would not brook any disagreement. I think the whole point of a committee is that you get a variety of viewpoints. And you've got to be willing to listen to those players. How can I sit here on the one hand and say our key metric is player engagement, and then on the other hand say my way or the highway? That those two views cannot coexist, So yeah, I think the way that I would respond to that criticism is to definitely treat it with respect and make changes where necessary.
Thank you. So, in that same area, do you think that there is a culture or a perception of culture or user experience on the 2E side of the forums that is negative or unpleasant? And if so, why do you think that is? And if not, why do you think people think that is?
So there's a small undercurrent at our website. I refer to as a small undercurrent of negativity on the internet writ large. Negativity seems to get the most attention. Trust me, as a guy who works in the media, I know that if I publish the bad stuff, it gets more clicks than the positive stuff. So a part of that perception of, man, the 2E forums are just filled with all this negativity is that it's a outgrowth of being an internet forum. There's a reason that a lot of BBSs and internet forums have seen a decrease in traffic. Part of it, of course, is that a lot of people are moving over to social media. But the other part of it is there's that feeling of, I don't want to go there and just read more people complaining. So yes, there is a bit of that going on in the forums. And I think one of the ways you combat it is the way that I've combated it on the website for my newspapers. I make sure to publish positive stuff whenever possible. Now, this isn't going to eliminate the negativity. We all know that. But I think one of the ways that you can boost that feeling and consequently boost engagement in the 2E forums and forums in general, but certainly second edition forums, is to make sure you're putting stuff in there that actually has people wanting to come and read it. Rules discussions are important. Card strategy discussions are great. But too many times the forums devolve into nothing but people complaining about this or that. And then you, of course, have these personality conflicts that we're also familiar with, where there's a bunch of name calling going on. Now, we're hoping that over the years, the code of conduct is going to help keep that down, and it does to a degree. But I think the way you combat that, rather than trying to make more rules or trying to enforce more rules, is that you have discussion topics or threads, if you will, that people will want to come and check out because it's more about building up your strategy, building up your tactics, or in my case as 2E director, if I were to become the 2E director, building up what we have in the pipeline and talking about the projects and the ideas going on. So you provide an alternative to the negativity and let nature take its course. People are more drawn to positivity on a repeat basis than they are to negativity on a repeat basis. You will get a lot of eyeballs with a lot of attention, a lot of clicks with a very negative presentation, but you don't necessarily retain those people.
Okay. So we talked a lot about player engagement and recruitment and all that, and we talked a lot about the culture. Other than those things, getting into the meat of 2E a little bit, what would you identify as two of the biggest problems that the 2E game has right now?
So one of the things I frequently complain to Nathan and the rest of the crew in the playtest group about is, a while ago, it began to feel to me that dilemmas had changed from what they originally were envisioned to be. If you look at dilemmas from Premiere, Energize, etc., early sets, it's a puzzle that you have to try to find a way to solve. Then as we move on through the rest of the Decipher era, and then some more during our era, dilemmas just become this automatic stopping thing or this automatic death thing. And it's not a puzzle so much as it is just a roadblock or an obstacle. And then sometimes, if you have the right combination of cards, that obstacle turns into, a total minefield, and all your guys die. And you get a whole turn or several turns worth of plays wiped out by a couple of dilemmas that didn't provide any sort of way around them. And so it becomes almost perfunctory that you go and attempt a mission with people that are just a bunch of dilemma magnets, as it were. All they do is try to go and get some dilemmas underneath the mission, because there's not going to be like, you're going to get stopped unless you have officer and leadership. People don't use a lot of dilemmas like that anymore. But then we had an even bigger problem compound the dilemma situation when we started making a lot of, and Decipher made a lot of these too, not just us, dilemmas that would not get overcome. So going back to what I said earlier about feeling like your actions are pointless, or rather you have no impact on the game state, you don't even get the benefit of, well, at least I overcame one or two dilemmas during that mission attempt. You have a situation where you're just spinning your wheels and you can't really feel as though your player agency is having any effect. You feel as though the stuff that you're doing is totally inconsequential to the game. So I would like to see a project where we somehow make dilemmas meaningful again, but also something that players actually feel they can have an effect upon, and find a way to make mission attempts more of a fun and interactive experience, as opposed to just hitting the same automatic stop or automatic kill dilemmas over and over. Now, recently, we have had some dilemma design that went back to, hey, here's a bunch of skill requirements, which I think is good for the overall health of the game. So that'd be the one thing, is that making sure that people don't feel their mission attempts are totally pointless, because it can also make it feel like the game's going to last forever because you're not overcoming any dilemmas and you're just going to keep churning away and away and away. The other thing that I would like to see is I would like to see more of the espionage idea from first edition be somehow implemented in second edition. I feel like that would be a good way to do some kind of more player interaction, not so much attempting your opponent's missions like it is over in first edition, but definitely something that involves you interacting and doing stuff over on your opponent's side of the universe, as it were. Decipher, in their wisdom or lack of wisdom, depending on who you ask, made it to where you could move to other players' missions in second edition. Other than battle, obviously, and a couple of infiltration tricks, that's not used a whole lot in current second edition. There was a particular attempt to let Romulans do more about, doing stuff at your opponent's missions a while back, which met with some mixed results. And so I would love to see that be the other thing that we look at as far as a quote unquote problem that second edition has, is a way to make being at your opponent's mission both more important and more rewarding, because it takes a lot of effort to get a starship staffed with enough people, a lot of resources, a lot of counters, and then move them over there to the other side of the table where they're kind of not doing anything until the key moment. So I think that's a lot of area where we could work on in second edition to make the game even more interactive. So yeah, I dislike the status of dilemmas right now, because it feels that they're almost perfunctory, and in some cases it feels hopeless because you're not overcoming anything. And I'd love to see having my starships or personnel over at your mission have more to do in the game.
Okay, thank you. Jonathan, did you have any other questions or follow-ups that you wanted to ask?
I do not. Some of the things I did have questions about, you've already covered in yours.
Awesome. Well, I apologize for monopolizing the question time.
No worries.
I'm pretty satisfied, and I think I've hit all of the questions that our other panelists posted. So, Scott, I'd like to give you the opportunity to ask any questions you might have of us.
Sure. I think my first question, when I was made aware of, saw the posting about, hey, we're looking for another director of second edition. What made y'all think that now was the time that you had to do it? I mean, obviously Ross is leaving, but what was the impetus for all of that?
I'm I don't want to speak ill of Ross because that's not my goal or anything, but there was a lot of the volunteers weren't particularly happy with some of the messaging that was happening, and that sort of spilled out over into the public. And at the time Ross stepped down, he felt like he wasn't going to get through a period of review without being recalled. And if you think that's going to happen, it's the natural choice is to just I'm going to step down.
Right.
But I think the bigger picture overall is that there is this negative feeling about TUI in a lot of places, concentrated on the website. Obviously, there are pocket groups of people who are happily playing TUI regularly.
Yeah.
And they're not engaging on the website. But a lot of the volunteers were frustrated, and some vocal players were frustrated, and it felt to the community, and the committee that the TUI was at a point where this is a crossroads, where this is, we can make some changes and address some of these issues, or we can not. And the fear was, if we didn't take action quickly and decisively, that path led to ruin.
Right.
And that wasn't anything. I personally have worked for CC for 10 years, more than 10 years. I don't want that to happen, even though I don't really do much TUI anymore. Nobody really wanted to see that happen. So that the impetus behind doing this now was, it's important. We felt it was a critical juncture to get this done in a timely manner and find the right candidate. So we had to balance the line between finding someone quickly and finding someone correctly.
Yeah. Jonathan, if you're willing to answer a question, what do you hope to see from the person that gets this job?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. Probably the biggest thing that, again, not to, just beat up on Ross, but there were times where I felt like communication could have been better. That, it's not entirely clear to me what's going on or what I'm supposed to be doing. And I would just, like to see nice, clear communication. This is what the procedure is going to be, and this is the timeline for doing it. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that one of the things y'all want to fix is inter-committee communication and communication with the public, because hey, that's what I do every day, is communicate complicated concepts to the public.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Sure. Well, at this point, I think, unless there's any other questions anyone has, I think I'm going to call this good. So just to recap, we have 4 candidates. This is the last scheduled interview. So what will happen now is basically there's a selection committee of 7 people. All the recordings have been posted to them since they were made. What's going to happen now is I'm going to go back through the recordings and make sure there's nothing in there that's like confidential information. Remove those bits, and then I'm going to put them up in a playlist on our YouTube channel, and everybody will have the chance to watch them and comment on them. So what will happen next is you'll get a PM from me with all these details as well, because none of the other candidates have had that info either. But we'll set up a thread, and you guys will be invited to go in there and ask questions or answer questions. While that's happening, the committee will be deliberating. And then after about a week of the videos being up, we're going to start making a vote. Once we've picked someone, I will contact everybody regardless of the outcome. So you will get a message from me whether we select you or we don't select you. You're not going to find out on the front page, because that's
Yeah.
not professional or courteous, and I want to be both of those things. So I anticipate at the outside this entire process taking about 3 weeks.
Okay.
So I would say by the end of February, you will have heard something one way or the other.
Cool.
We may have follow-up questions for you from the selection committee, which I will PM to you and have you reply in writing and then share the answers. So keep an eye out for that.
All right.
But, other than that, I think thank you for your time and your inviting us into your awesome little den.
Yes.
So I'm looking forward to watching this later and seeing if I can recognize all the stuff in your room. But yeah, thank you for your time. Have a good night. Jonathan, thank you for joining me. And I'm going to go ahead and stop the call here. Stop the
Okay,
recording.
great. Yeah. Live long and prosper, everybody.
Indeed.
Good night.